We got our next episode of The Draft this week. And this week, I'm going to talk a little bit about outlining and what I do after I finish research. So I've done all my research, and I talked a little bit about character last week because that's kind of how I go into things next. And going off of what I said last week, right? This idea of letting your characters kind of talk to you, right? And just kind of tell you maybe a little bit where they would go instead of you trying to steer them in a certain direction. That is something that it could just be an exercise, like I said. But so here's a good place to maybe allow for that to happen. I would always just kind of break down every character. That's what I do. And so if I have a protagonist, which you need, but also sometimes it could be multi-perspective. The one I'm working on now, I'm still figuring that out a little bit. It's multi-perspective. Lately, I've been thinking it needs to be kind of like this. The protagonist needs to be the place, and that can help make it multi. That's what I've been thinking about lately. Not a specific person, but the place itself. Maybe that's the protagonist, and that's how I can make it kind of flow better in my head as to how I approach the characters here. But that's what I do. Coming up with characters is like it's like exactly how it sounds. You give them a name, and it should come to you in an interesting kind of almost natural way. I always kind of will name my characters very specifically, almost like thematically in like in a symbolic way that represents the story. I name them the main characters. For instance, one of the characters here is Quaid. His name is Quaid, and he has no last name, and that is 100% due to the kind of character he is in this story. He's somebody who's hiding from people, so he like created a new identity, but he didn't give himself a last name. And then there's Western undertones to this story, and I figure like it's very like John Wayne, like kind of like or this idea of like Eastwood's characters always kind of had one name like that. There's that kind of so what you name them, hundreds. Every decision that you make writing is important. Like everything should be intentional. Every little detail should be intentional. And I even think that when I'm naming my characters. So like obviously this is a gangster western kind of film here that I'm working on. So like his full name and his real name we get to learn. It's some long Italian name, but he's just Quaid. He's the hero of this story and his name's Quaid, and that's all we need, and that was intentional. So you should think that way, and then I break down everything about this character, his backstory, what happens the backstory is important, but it's not so important that you should flesh it out into don't fucking create like a fucking profile like with all the little pointless details. Just basically like you're telling a little story of what happened to this person throughout his life. There's everything that happened before the movie started, and then there's everything that happens during the course of the movie, and that is the movie kind of. When I'm breaking down what the characters do in the context of the 2-hour movie, that part of their life is the movie. That part of the life when I'm writing out all that stuff that happens, that's where I pull scenes from. That's where you start to think of. That's where scenes come from the movie, and it's for every character. You'll have a scene from another point of view. The movie's probably in terms of point of view is important. Probably going to be in the main character's point of view for most of the movie, but you'll have point of view scenes from other characters. When I'm writing out what happens to other characters in the movie, that's always interesting because a lot of that stuff doesn't even end up in the movie, but I'll underline like potential scenes, and then there could be a scene there. So that's kind of just where I go after research. I start with character, and plot comes from character for me, more so than the other way around. It can happen the other way around, but I've just never gone that way. And so lately too, I've been thinking when I do that step in the process, that's where I want to kind of let the characters tell me what's going on more than I have in the past. That's something I'm going to change going forward. But I'll keep going on this in future episodes of the draft. So I hope you liked this one. I'm not going to just do everything. I'm not going to do everything. That's where we are here now in this one.